For the longest time, Mexicans have wondered why we never became a superpower like the United States. That is a trauma of our history. The reason, it is said, is that we were conquered by the Spanish Empire, associated with the supposed backwardness of Catholic authoritarianism, while the United States emerged out of the British Empire under Protestant liberal rationality. Mexican scholars have challenged this idea by trying to uplift Spanish political thought, but I think that's the wrong strategy. Rather than challenging ideas of Spanish backwardness, my dissertation questions the assumed rationality of English political thought. My first claim is that this self-proclaimed rationality is perpetuated in part by an intellectual tradition that works in such a way that uplifts modern reason in the history of political thought. In order to do this, scholars must ignore a series of arguments present in all sorts of sources that do not come from political treatises, but from myths. Therefore, I decided to focus on the myth that was most prominently featured in debates about empire in England, the myth of King Arthur. To study this myth, I immersed myself in several archives in England and digital collections to trace every mention I could find of Arthur between the 15th century and the early 17th century, the dawn of the British Empire. After collecting the data and process it, I laid out a full narrative of the myth and proceed to analyze it. A myth, I claim, is a socially structured story that communicates a series of ideas interconnected in specific ways. I found that during the period I studied, the Arthurian myth connected several ideas between British Confederative Union and imperial expansion. In other words, the concepts of empire and Britain were intimately related in English political thought, and the glue was the Arthurian myth. This specific conceptual dynamic had some specific effects. From the formulation of the name British Empire in the late 16th century, first a reference to Arthur's empire, to the creation of a first legal imperial framework in the early 17th century, traced back as a precedent to Arthur's reign. The significance of my dissertation surpasses the specific of my research. Yes, the British Empire at its origins was grounded in myth and not on the claimed rationality of English Protestant liberal thought, like Anglophone scholars so proudly argue. Therefore, I see my dissertation as an invitation and roadway to shift our gaze away from the supposed triumph of reason and grapple with the social stories that gave rise to our political cultures.